Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin our SBDM meeting for today. It's Wednesday, June the 3rd. We're just going to go ahead and dive right into discussing today's agenda. It's just strictly discussing the grading policy. This is we're having a meeting here, special meeting, so that we can get this prepared and get a draft for our first draft hearing for our meeting, our regularly scheduled meeting later this month. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Wright, and we'll begin discussing our grading policy.
So just a few things about our objective today. Remember, today primarily is for the actual council to have discussion about the points in the proposal brought forward by the Grading Policy Committee. The Grading Policy Committee is here to answer any potential questions that you may have. So feel free to utilize them, but ultimately, as the elected council members, these decisions will be up to you. The plan, hopefully, is we will have whatever we're ready to take to formulate into the language of policy for the next meeting, where at that time we could potentially do a first reading, and then at the July meeting we could actually do a second reading and bring it to a vote. So with that in mind, we'll just be going bullet point by bullet point through this. It can be as simple as, if everyone just feels like they're in agreement one way or the other right off the bat, we can make that decision. Otherwise, if you would like to have discussion on any particular bullet, then let me know that as well. I'll be keeping track, I'll be keeping notes and keeping minutes, and then I will bring it to, I will bring this into the language of Site-Based for our regularly scheduled June meeting. The specific language that we use today is not terribly important because we can change language after the first reading, after whatever's brought late in June. So just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about not only what our objective is, but what our next steps are after today. Okay, so look at the proposal brought forth by the committee. We'll start with the subsection of midterms and finals, and the first subpoint of must be cumulative either for the semester's instruction or the entire year's instruction. And now we'll open it up to council for discussion.
I'm in favor of keeping the fact that it's cumulative. So I agree with that.
Mr. Campbell, you're getting ready to talk there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I did talk, but I was muted.
Okay.
I just said I agree.
Okay.
I agree with
it. Okay, so we would like to propose that.
Mrs. Bushley, what are your thoughts before we get all teachers, and then we hear the parents' perspective as well? Can't hear you.
Sorry, I unmuted it and then it muted me again.
Okay.
I'm in favor of the midterms and finals remaining cumulative.
And how about our parents? Ms. Gonzalez, what are your thoughts?
I'm okay with it.
Okay. And Mrs. Sparks?
I'm good with it as well.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the second subpoint, must be required in all classes except resource and rotation courses. This approach to midterms and finals helps students work toward, this is just their note, work toward mastery of skills and content, provides an additional opportunity to demonstrate learning of skills and content, and allows another opportunity to retest of any material missed. So the point of discussion is whether it is required in all classes except resource and rotation courses.
I'm fine with it being required with the caveat that there can be exemptions for having an A as well as college or career readiness.
My only concern is one of the things posed by the committee was a desire for an increase in teacher autonomy. Do we feel like there's going to be concern about teacher autonomy if we require a cumulative midterm or final?
I feel like having the cumulative, it's really best practice. So, I mean, I would hope that everyone would agree to do that.
I
feel like
I agree.
Autonomy.
I'll pose the question.
I agree, and I'm fine.
I'm just going to say, I posed a question to the committee. Did you encounter any teachers in your discussions that would not have offered a cumulative final had they been given the opportunity?
So you're asking if somebody was not planning on doing a cumulative?
Yeah, or would they, is there something that you encountered that teachers would want other than that?
No.
I would remind that part of the proposal, the fourth subcategory or subset that we'll talk about is having the opportunity to do a different type of cumulative assessment beyond a traditional test. So is that kind of to your question, Mr. Campbell, or did I misunderstand?
No, I'm just saying, are there any teachers, I don't know of any teachers that don't give cumulative finals.
I know in years past, there have been teachers that just give end of unit tests and not cumulative over the course.
I would agree with Ms. Fields. I know several teachers have come to me and brought up the fact that they were giving unit tests as opposed to cumulative. So I'm not surprised at that.
And I like to keep this in here because I think it's keeping up with a high expectation that you need to retain the information you've gone over. And so I like having it in, but I agree with Mr. Campbell. We need to include the exception of those for college and career ready and have the scores to be exempt, or previous exemption policy.
Which is currently in policy, which is why we didn't add it in there. So it would just be taking these bullet points and adding to the pieces that are already put in place.
And I'm in agreement with it. I just would like there to be that flexibility that you mentioned, Mr. Wright, later on in the bullet points of having the opportunity to do other styles of exams other than a traditional cumulative final, be it projects or term papers or whatever, at the discretion of the teacher.
I agree with that too, Ms. Bushley. I like the comments that Mr. Campbell and Ms. Bushley both made, and I would agree with it with those caveats.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay. And then, so in relation to that, the next point really is just a qualifier that quarterly and semester courses may choose to have a cumulative midterm or final for that quarter or semester of information because, of course, you couldn't do a full year test on a non-full year course. So then with that in mind, the next point is that it must be worth 20% of the semester grade. There is a bird in your room, Mr. Myers.
It sounds like I had a couple cardinals outside my back door, and I'm like, my God, they seem like they're right in here with me. I'm looking around. One of my kids might let one in the door. I wouldn't be surprised.
All right, so while he deals with his bird problem, let's discuss whether we want it to be worth 20% of the semester grade. Teachers want to start?
I'm okay with it. Per our last discussion, I think the 60-40, and then with this being the 20, we kind of got back to the 70-30 per Mr. Bird. So assuming we just kind of stick with that, I don't see it as being a huge change. And I like giving a little bit more percent to the formative at the beginning of the quarters, because I know we give them 2 weeks before EOP, but that doesn't always count with athletes. And, if you only have 2 assignments and you bomb them both, or bomb one, I don't know, maybe a little heavier percentage on the formatives will kind of help at the beginning.
That was kind of our thought too when we were talking through it.
I too like it. In our last meeting, I listed the reasons why. Basically, it's if a student does fumble on one of the summatives during the semester, that final or midterm would give them a good opportunity to prove that they have since learned it, and it would, could affect their grade and positively. And I think it's also good practice for high stakes exams that they may take later in their high school career.
I personally feel like it's, am I on? Yes, I'm on. I personally feel like it's a little high. I mean, I hate the idea of, just philosophically, I disagree with the premise of high stakes testing in education. Just that's my personal philosophy. But if we want to make it worth more than a regular exam, I completely understand that. I just feel like 20% that a student could lose an entire letter grade on one snapshot of their learning on one day at one sitting seems kind of high to me.
Would there be any interest from council of changing that number, or is the rest of council kind of set at the 20% for those who agree with it?
I'd like to hear the parents' point of view.
So this is Angela. Honestly, I feel like I lean more towards Ms. Bushley's thought process, only because I've been on the site base for a long period of time, and I've heard all of the discussions over the years of the good and bad of it. But as a parent, I'm representing the majority of parents, and I have asked several parents what their opinions are, and the majority would say they would agree with it. So my vote would be to allow it.
And I would agree it solely based upon seeing what my kids have done over the last 2 years. I've never seen them take accountability for any test. I've never seen them study. And these are skills that they're going to need after high school as well. So yeah, I'm totally for it. They need to be held accountable, and 20% is completely fair.
So we want to stick with it being a higher percentage of the semester grade. Do we want to stick with the 20% then?
I mean, if it were to change to 15%, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. I just like the idea of it counting more than a unit test. That's my stance.
I agree.
If we did change it, I'd like to see the math of how it affects the entire semester / year. Because the committee had specifically sounded like they specifically picked that number because it would bring us closer to the 70-30 total that we currently have.
Mr. Bird, do you know if there's a big difference if you use that example that you had before?
I'm trying to crunch the numbers right now. I'm having some technology issues. I'm switching over to the computer at the moment.
Crunch faster.
Just give me a moment.
So given the 20%, though, when we asked for numbers before, there wasn't a scenario that they were able to provide that significantly changed the grade that would impact a student, was there? Like majorly impact a student? I think that would be my biggest concern in having a higher number, is if there was a way that one test could majorly impact a student's grade.
They would have to significantly fail it in order, let's say they had a 90 to 100 in the class. If they significantly failed it, it would drop their grade quite a bit, but not to the point where it would fail them.
And like by significantly, I think we said it had to be like a 30%, 25% or less, like completely bomb kind of thing.
So are these tests able to be done in alternative manners like other assessments are too, in that a student who has a hard time taking it in one certain manner is given a different opportunity?
Absolutely. Any student that has any kind of accommodation modification will be treated just like any other assessment. You know, special ed teachers modify midterms. We pull kids, we read to them, we scribe for them, we give them extended time. All of that stuff goes into play with midterms as well.
So what about the kids that don't have an IEP? Like just kids in general who, you know, we have some higher end functioning kids that just don't test well. What about those students? Like would accommodations be available for, you know, over the years you can see your students, and, you know, teachers kind of get used to seeing the students, and they know that a certain one struggles with tests but does, you know, follows the directions and does things fairly well most of the year. Do they have to have an IEP for you to make those accommodations?
In my experience working with the teachers at the high school that I have worked with over the years, no. Simply put, that they do not need to have an IEP. As long as the kid is willing and comes up. Now, granted, if it's, you know, May 28th and they're taking their midterm and this is the first time it's been brought up all year,
right?
I can see a teacher probably saying no. But if this has been an ongoing issue all year with our students, I have never encountered a teacher that didn't allow a student to come with me or to get, you know, other modifications or adaptations to their tests, even if they didn't have an IEP. I've never encountered that.
So as far as policy goes, if the council decides to approve the next portion, which says it does not have to be a traditional multiple choice constructive response assessment, that does not only apply to an entire class. So that would give the teacher within policy, in the language of the policy, that would give them the autonomy, Ms. Gonzalez, to work with the kid in that nature and use their professional judgment to differentiate in that way.
Okay. So is there a way? Go ahead, sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to ask Mr. Bird while he's crunching numbers. I know that Ms. Core said something about they would have to get like a 20 or 30% on that exam in order for it to significantly affect their grade. And maybe I wrote it down wrong, but I thought the example that we had talked about at the last meeting was as high as like a 60%, that it would affect the grade, a full letter grade. But maybe I'm wrong. I just wanted to ask Mr. Bird.
So really, with the 20% semester grade, you would have to get a 50 to drop 10% for the semester, which would be a full letter grade. So anything of 50 or below would drop you a full letter grade.
Yeah. Theoretically, if the student had a cumulative grade of an 80% coming into taking that midterm or taking that final, and they got a 0, it would drop them down to a 64. They would still be passing. That's the current weighting or proposed weighting.
And if a kid is holding an 84 for the semester, it's more than likely a kid who cares about their grade in the first place, who would make plans with that teacher to work with them if they were really concerned. I think what Ms. Gonzalez was talking about. You have kids who really care about their grades, but they struggle on tests. Those are where those accommodations can be made.
So, Mr. Bird, if you looked at this test, say a kid is, you know, riding the fence passing, and they've got a 62 or 63 average, what would it take for that student to fail for the year or the semester, I should say?
Let me see here. Let's see.
And this is with the 20%, correct?
Yes, with the 20%.
Be a round of 50.
So if they got a final score exam like a 43 or something like that, is that going to make them, where does that end up with the kid? What is it? What's the lowest score they could get and still pass? Just think about failure rate.
I think and this is general, this is not a policy discussion, this is a teacher discussion, but if we're having kids in that situation where they are getting 43s on a cumulative exam, we really need to examine our practice and what we're doing in our classrooms in the first place. That's not the discussion we're having right now, but we very much have to be cognizant of that, whether this is worth 20% or whether this is what we currently have in place. So while we wait for Mr. Bird to come up with some different scenarios, let's drop down to the next bullet point, discuss that, and then perhaps we can come back to that 20% number and decide any sort of consensus there. So the next bullet says, may take the form of a traditional multiple choice and constructive response assessment. However, midterms and finals may also take the form of projects, presentations, and any other non-traditional forms that adequately assess student learning of standards, skills, and content from the semester's instruction or the entire year's instruction.
Sounds like it covers it to me.
I agree. I think that's best practice.
Parents?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, so then the last thing that we have to figure out as far as midterms and finals, are we set with the 20% or do we want to alter that number?
Should we move on to the next one, then come back? Should we move on to formative and summative assessment while he's crunching that number so we can have discussion, or so
Yeah.
we keep
That's fine.
going?
So
I've got that one done. Sorry.
Okay.
Talking, I didn't realize I muted it back again. If a student has a 62% average, then they would, if they got a 50%, they would then pass with a 59.6. If a student had a 61% between the two terms, then they would need approximately a 60 or so to pass. So if they're passing the class and they get near a passing score, they're going to essentially pass for the term. If they're failing the class and they fail the test, they're out. If they're close to passing, but they bomb the test, then that would, I mean, when I say bomb, I'm saying, below a 50%, that would fail them. And personally, I feel if you're taking a summative test and you cannot score, or a cumulative test and you cannot score 50% on it, you likely do not understand that material.
What would the difference be if you used 15% instead of 20 on that 61% example?
excuse me.
Well, let me point out one thing really quick. Currently, our summative grade is 70% of the term grade, and in a class, if you give 3 summatives in a quarter, you take that 70%, divide by 3. Each one of those summatives that you're giving, the unit summatives, or they're worth 23% of the grade. So they're individually actually very significant. So of the 70 possible points, 23 of them can be attributed to a single test if you give 3 unit summatives in a quarter. I know some classes give 2, some classes give 4. If you were to give 4 unit summatives, it's 17.5% of the, a single test is 17.5% of their grade within that term. So I feel like a 20% is a pretty reasonable number mathematically. If a teacher were to only give 2 unit tests in a quarter or in a term, each test would be worth 35% of that term grade for that student. So I feel like we're pretty conservative weighting it at only 20%, seeing as there's opportunities that, or situations where I know tests have been given where they were worth way more of the cumulative grade for a student.
So, but in our current grading model, though, in those tests that are weighted today, they have the opportunity to relearn and retake and change that outcome. Whereas this test is not one where they can do that.
Our current policy also does not allow students to retake midterms or finals.
Yes. From a practical standpoint, if you're giving a 2-hour test and you're giving this cumulative test, you're going to cover typically the high points of the units. You're not going to be as super detailed or as necessarily as precise in your questioning as you would be in a unit test, where you have an hour to test 2 or 3 weeks worth of work, where in a semester test you have 2 hours to for 18 weeks worth of work. I feel like that's a situation where you either really understand it or you don't. I don't think we're going to have a lot of kids that truly put in effort that would come in and tank a test like that. And if they are going to tank a test like that, it should be pretty obvious in their current grade in that class. That's how I would feel if the tests are aligned to standards and their questions are very well thought out. That's how I see it playing out.
I also want to piggyback on what Matt said as far as preparing for a midterm and final. A lot more time in class is set aside to reteach. It's not just like 1 day of review. It's like 3 days of review or 4 days of review, which if a kid is still struggling on a specific topic, that's a good time for them to relearn it or try to learn it for the first time. And I know teachers stay after school as well. So not only is it a longer time to test, but it's also a longer time to reteach and relearn and review in class.
And I would feel better about it if that were regularly the practice. If we had in practice at our school that, the whole week leading up to those midterms and finals were spent in review of that material, so we could kind of catch kids that are struggling, try to pull up anybody who we feel is drowning academically and give them that support. I would be a whole lot more in favor of that if that were regular practice.
That could be something that I wouldn't necessarily advocate for putting it in the policy just because there are so many different things, but that could be something that Mr. Myers and I look at as far as instituting essentially a dead week, like what you would see in a college setting where there was no new material being taught. That could be something that certainly we could explore if we went to this.
Well, typically, there is like a week period between the date that we can give our last summative exam and finals week. Typically, that does fall a little bit early. And in my experience, most of the teachers that I've worked with will end new content at the last date that they can give a summative exam. And then begin, I've done it every year, begin reviewing for the final that week in between the last summative and finals week.
Yes,
I
I
feel
also
like
do the same thing.
the majority of the teachers, I can't say all, because I'm not in everybody's class, but the majority of the teachers follow that same method, Mr. Campbell.
I
So-
know that Mears and I
What-
did it. Ladani did it, or I'm sorry, Elrod. But those are the only teachers that I really know for sure.
So what I'm hearing from the teachers, and correct me if I'm wrong, if Mr. Myers and I explicitly stated that we wanted that as our practice, it wasn't necessarily insight-based policy, but we made it clear to teachers that we want that as our practice, as our norm, with some exceptions because there's consistently outliers in situations, but we want that as our practice as a school, that the staff would be on board. Okay. All right. Fair enough. So then are we on board with the 20% and ready to move on?
I am ready to move on.
I agree.
Where I told Mr. Myers, my goal, I'm a little more straightforward than normal. If you don't notice, my goal is to keep us moving tonight. I don't want to be sitting here at 6:30. Full transparency. Okay. So we will
Why not?
put that in. Obviously, because contrary to probably what the entire staff believes, I do have some form of life, but it's very little.
You didn't have to answer.
Huh?
You didn't have to answer.
I like to be transparent and honest. Okay. So then moving on to the next subsection of formative and summative assessments. Summative assessments must account for 60% of the term quarter grade. Remember that the current policy would state that summative assessments must account for 70% of the term quarter grade. Teachers.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Parents?
I'm fine with it.
Okay, so with that in mind, if we're going 60% with our summatives, we have to go 40% with our formatives, and that moves us off of formative and summative assessments altogether. So, see, told you, straightforward, moving. Great book set up. First bullet, points versus percentages. Teachers may choose to set up their grade books based on assignment and assessment points or percentages. Remember, currently, someone correct me and give me a little more specific here, but everything has to be out of 100, essentially. This would allow for 10-point assignments, 20-point assignments, what have you.
I think everybody knows I'm not a fan of mixing them, just because I've seen it be different. Now, if we wanted to change it to where the entire school went to all points instead, at least it's consistent. I'm a fan of consistency. So that would be an option instead of keeping it at all percentage. I just want to make sure everybody's consistent.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not a fan of them not being consistent. If you look at it from a parent's perspective, trying to keep track of a kid's grades, if you have kids same grade or close to same grade and they have two different teachers and they're doing it different ways, it's just difficult to keep track of and understand where your child's at.
I have a real concern about points as well, because the reason, having been here through several iterations of this whole policy and many changes, when teachers assigned point, and I understand, an OA being different than a lengthier assignment, But when we gave the ability to assign specific points to specific assignments, that was utilized to then reweight everything by some teachers. And I feel like if we're going to make clear delineations based on the committee's recommendations for everything else, I would hate to undo all those specific delineations that we're passing based on their recommendations with points that could then make things really wonky.
So, someone needs to explain that to me, because I've heard people say that before, Ms. Bushley. If you set up Infinite Campus correctly, you should be able, so with our, if we're going 60-40 with our formative and summative assessments, I should theoretically be able to give 1 million points worth of assignment for formative assessments, and it still only count as 40% of the grade. Whereas I should be able to give a 1 point assignment for summatives, and it should be worth 60% of the grade. So I'm not understanding what happened there.
I don't understand either, but that was not the case. When we tried it in Infinite Campus previously several years ago, people were able to make some assignments 2 points and some assignments 50 points, and it made a significant difference in student grades based on whether it was a percent, if it was a percentage versus points. And I'm not sure how the inner workings of Infinite Campus are, but it did not work like we had hoped it would.
Was that before we did formative and summative split?
I was going to say the same thing, but I don't recall. Did we weight our grade when we had the autonomy to do points versus percentages and everybody could pick I didn't think our sections were weighted then, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm positive that they were weighted, because that was the big issue that we ran into, was that because things weren't set out of 100 points, the 70-30 somehow in Infinite Campus got adjusted. We looked at 2 different kids, and Aaron, maybe you can help refresh my memory with this, but we worked points versus percentages for a couple of different kids with a couple of different grades, and they came out with significantly different grades in Infinite Campus with points versus everything based out of 100, and that was the concern.
Yeah, and that does happen because I think I can. Because like if you went into Infinite Campus right now and even took your grades and went to a point system, it would look different. You would get different letter grades. But sorry, I'm kind of all over it. Something we need to think about also what this would look like. If we were to go to points, what would that look like? We're talking later down the bullet points on deductions for late assignments, and then you go to a points-based system. What would that look like? How would you decide how many points you're going to take off if it was only a 5-point assignment? And are you going to end up then turning it into a percentage and then take it off there, and then we're dealing with like 3.75 points?
So
a nightmare.
So I'll chime in with just a situation that I went through. Is I would generally take points off for late assignments when I was in the classroom myself. Our grade book was set up based on points. A normal assignment was worth 20 points. So because the max I would take off was 15%, I would take 3 points.
You just hit your own system. I worry about staff and how that would work with everybody. And would it be accurate and fair?
So let me ask this just to try to keep us moving. Is there a difference in the way that we would vote based on whether IC would calculate the way that we wanted to calculate versus the experience that was had in the past? Or is there an appetite to just stay at 100% period? And the reason I ask that is because one thing that we could do is table this particular point of discussion until the first reading. And during that time, I could work with Mr. Woods and I could work with Ms. Erdman to try to see if we could figure out what was going on and what was creating those issues in the past.
So personally, sorry, Ms. Gonzalez.
Go ahead.
was just say personally, this is not based in data or fact or anything, but personally, I would like in the classroom to have the ability to change the value of formative assessments. I don't think it really relates to summative assessments, but I would like to be able to change the value, because in the past, when everything was worth the same, I've given writing to learn pieces that students would simply not do because it was a formative grade and it's not going to hurt them that much. So that's, based on my experience, but this is not particularly a sticking issue with me. I could go either way, but just if I was choosing my own path, I would like that ability.
Yeah, so I was just going to add that back when we had issues, we did have the split, and it was at the 60-40 split, not the 70-30. Again, because I don't have access to that side of it, I don't know exactly what the specifics were or why it wasn't working. From a parent's perspective, what I care about the most is understanding and knowing, with having differences between teachers or assignments, is how does that overall affect my child's GPA, and understanding where they stand at that point in time. And if you can figure out a way to communicate that and make it be very clear to a parent, I wouldn't care either way.
Ms. Sparks?
I'm just taking it all in. I think they all have valid points. I don't feel hard one way or the other way.
So is this something that we want to consider with the first reading, or do we want to strike this down?
And this would all be contingent on whether Kate is able to make it work where it wouldn't drastically affect people's grades, correct?
Yeah.
I would like to wait a minute on that.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand you, Ms.
I
Scott.
would like to wait until I can see it in Infinite Campus. I mean, I can give you like paper examples.
So we can table the discussion if that's what we want to do, or if we want to strike it down. I mean, everything's on the table at this point.
Yeah. I think if we have at least a member that's hesitant, we should do the work to see if we can get us all closer to being comfortable with it.
Okay. I will have a conversation with Mr. Woods in the coming days to see what we can figure out.
I guess here's what I'm sorry. I was jotting down numbers on paper. I don't know if you can see it or not, but and maybe you know how to do this in Infinite Campus, Mr. Wright, but basically I just did a points assessment, like 19 out of 20, 20 out of 20, 10 out of 20, 13 out of 15, right?
Uh-huh.
So these are points, these would be grades. Out of 100, and there was a total of 100 points. This student got 77 points out of 100. So they would have a formative grade of 77%, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All makes sense? Okay, then I took these exact same grades, but I did a column with percentages. So a 19 out of 20 is a 95%. 20 out of 20 was 100%. 10 out of 20 was a 50%. So then I take because there were 8 assignments, 8 now percentages in that category. When I average these percentages, I'm at a 69%. So we've gone from a 77 to a 69 just with, and I'm just making these numbers up, but I'm getting different averages at the end.
But I don't know that that's an apples to apples comparison, because I thought the discussion that we were having would be the points, so how you originally proposed, versus everything being out of a 100 percentage points. So everything being out of 100 versus some could be out of 20, to where, to me, I mean, a 17 out of 20 should always be an 85, and a 45 out of 50 should always be a 90. To where I'm missing something. There's a disconnect somewhere that I'm not understanding.
Within Infinite Campus, when it was set up with points, it's here's how many points you have available for the term. Here's how many points that you've earned, correct? Mm-hmm. And you take that number over the total, and that's what gives you your now percentage for the quarter, right?
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you have to factor in that?
If you basically make all of those percentages first, which is how we currently have it, and then average those, you're going to get a different number. And this is why I'm super big on it has to be consistent. You cannot have one teacher putting everything out of 100 and one teacher using points and switching it, because you could be getting the exact same grades on paper in two different classes, and one person end up with a C and one a D.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to look at that. I would recommend that, as far as from a policy standpoint, that you either have a uniform policy of having it one way or the other, or you just completely get rid of that particular policy. Because I don't think that you want, I don't think you want such a broad variance within policy itself. I'm talking more from a just running your site-based position than running a school, really.
The other thing I feel like we need to keep in mind is from a student and a parent perspective. I mean, the goal of site-based is to support and increase student achievement. And I feel like the more that students and parents understand the setup and the system, the better families are able to support their students in, getting the highest achievement that's possible for them. And I feel like if it's a whole lot easier for parents to understand a percentage out of 100 as opposed to a 2 out of 5, because ultimately they're going to get out their calculator and they're going to figure out what percentage a 2 out of 5 is. So I feel like that removes a step for a parent and just makes it very plain and very obvious and consistent for everybody.
So I would appreciate that as a parent.
So Ms. Bushley, back when we had this discussion a couple years ago, was this the topic that Ms. Huff and Ms. Sharon had a heavy opinion on, which kind of weighed into our decision back then? Or was that a different topic?
That was GPAs.
That was GPA for.
But wasn't it because we translate to percentages, and so we were taking points and we thought we had one grade, and then when it was transferred to percentages for the GPA, we were way off?
I'm not sure. I know that Infinite Campus for years didn't work at all for GPA anyway. We couldn't get an accurate GPA the way that Infinite Campus was calculating things. But I just feel like from a student's perspective, it's a whole lot easier for a student to understand, I got a 75 out of 100. I got a 75% on something, as opposed to, a point value that they then are going to calculate as a percentage anyway.
Okay, so I think Ms. Gonzalez called to table this, take a look at IC, try to see if there's any way to kind of remedy some of those issues, and then bring it back for discussion with the first reading. Remember, at the first reading, it could be taken out at that point if you want to take it out at that point. Are we in agreement to move forward that way?
I am.
Yes.
So then the next point brought by the committee is in relation to honors courses. says that the honors courses should not have a 10-point bump to their quarter grades because the classes are weighted by awarding 1 quality point to their GPAs.
If we're going to terminate one of those incentives for taking higher level and more difficult courses, I would much rather, if it's a big sticking point for people, I would much rather we do away with the weighted GPA, because ultimately for kids who are college bound, most colleges are going to look at an unweighted GPA anyway. And I would really like to see kids have some incentive to take that course, a more difficult course, and it not, crush their GPA.
I agree. I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask the committee. I mean, if we did switch that to taking away the weighted GPA, was there any other reason that isn't obvious to us why we would remove the 10-point bump and not the weighted GPA?
Was the person who talked about maybe
Who is?
Mr. Bird?
Sorry, I couldn't hear anything other than wind.
Yeah, somebody's got a windy microphone. I don't know who it is.
I just said your proposal says that you want to remove the 10-point bump because it's giving dual bumps. I'm just curious, anybody on the committee, if we were to choose to remove the weighted GPA rather than the 10-point bump, was there something that isn't obvious to us? There was a reason why you wanted specifically the 10 points taken away instead of the weighted.
I know every time we do report cards and we do grades, teachers that have honors classes, there are issues with how they do the 10-point bump and how it's calculated in Infinite Campus. Literally every single report card that I can think of, I've had to go through and help teachers calculate or fix it because of the way that it's set up in Infinite Campus and the way that we put the 10 points each term, and then we calculate the semester, and then you may or may not have to put the 10 points, and then the 10 points at the end of the year. So from a practical standpoint, eliminating the 10-point is going to take out a significant amount of human endeavor on the front end. And I feel like a weighted GPA, that's all automatically calculated by Infinite Campus. It's really hard for an individual teacher to inadvertently miscalculate their grade. Does that make sense?
It does, but I believe, didn't we discuss that Keys money is based on is it quarter grades, or is it end, like on that end grade and not your GPA, whether it's weighted or not?
So I've got
it's the final letter grade.
The Keys GPA, it says, I'm on their page right now, it says the Keys GPA differs from the unweighted Kentucky GPA calculation in the following ways. IB, International Baccalaureate classes, receive 1 additional point. So like a student with an A would get 5 points instead of 4. AP classes receive a point. Dual credit receive a point. And then Cambridge Advanced International courses receive 1 point. So that is how Keys processes that. If we give a 10-point bump, we are artificially inflating their GPA from the original intent of how Keys is awarded.
So let me get this right. So you're saying that
only for honors courses, though.
Well, so for like an 8th grade honors course, yes, it's a harder course, but a lot of schools only AP classes like actual, you take the AP test at the end of it, get weighted grades. We're weighting it and giving 10 points. It's just the advanced track. I think we're giving our kids way too much on the front end, point-wise, compared to what many other schools are doing.
So if this were an AP, if we had AP classes, you would be okay with that. That's what you're saying, right, Mr. Bird?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have kids that, they do well, but they end up getting, a 70. Well, then they get their 10-point bump and they get an 80, and then they happen to get that, extra point in their GPA. That's the equivalent of them scoring a 90, and that's just from what their their weighted GPA to what they really did in my course. It's a very inaccurate reflection, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that or saying like it should still be both, but we're trying which would be the best to take away.
Which is more
for the student?
I would say honestly the 10-point bump. There's a lot of mistakes that go into that being calculated every term, and I just feel like it's unfair to give all those points so early every term, when really we're looking at the big picture, especially in your honors classes.
And so Keys would only give that bump to people that are dual credit, and that's really it at our school because we don't have any AP classes.
Yeah, we don't have AP, we don't have IB, and we don't have the Cambridge Advanced International.
Right.
Those kids are still incentivized. They're taking the honors courses by their GPA is going to be higher. They're going to get more points for an A, a B, what have you.
But that GPA means nothing, though.
Right.
Right. You need to keep in mind with this conversation is currently based on policy. You're not calculating your val and your sal based off of GPA. You're calculating your val and sal based off of points. So really, in that particular circumstance, the points mean more.
Right, because I could take easy classes because I want to be first in my class, and somebody who's trying to work harder could lose those things so to me it sounds like it would make more sense to get rid of the weighted GPA and to keep the 10-point bump.
I agree.
And I would agree with that as well.
Is there not a way to fix the grade book so it's not as tedious for the teachers? The Infinite Campus?
No. Every term since we've done that, I go around and have to check people's grade books or help people with it.
Yeah, you'll continue to run into that. There's not an easy fix to that with IC.
The only other option would be to add the 10 points only once on the final grade. If we waited for the 10-point bump until the very final grade was posted, it would be a one-time thing, and a lot of those mistakes and issues would be avoided. So that would be an optional way to do it.
Which would still help the overall grade, correct?
Yes. Instead of having to, calculate each term and then verify each semester and then verify the final, the kids know that when it's all said and done at the end of the year, that final grade that's going to post gets a single 10-point bump. That would still wouldn't affect the val-sal calculation at all. They would still get the boost there, but it would remove a lot of opportunity for teacher error in calculating those grades.
And so a kid could finish with a 80 in the advanced classes, and at the end of the year, they're getting a 90.
Yes.
So overall, they're still getting an incentive. It's just not on the front end. It'll be received at the tail end of the year, but they're still getting the points needed to get the Keys money that they have earned.
Yeah, basically, they're getting exactly what they would get the way we're doing it now without the opportunity for as many errors in calculation.
Yeah, the numbers don't change at all. If you bump up 10 each quarter or you just wait and bump up 10 at the end of the year, the only thing that a kid would potentially miss out on would be like an honor roll, something that was quarterly based, but they're still getting the 10 points at the end of the year, which is the Keys money, which is their final grade. I'd be totally fine with that.
Yeah, and if they're missing the honor roll, they haven't retaken their summatives, which they have opportunities to do.
Well, right. I mean, it's how bad do you want it? Really.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. So do we want to change the wording instead of 10 points per, I don't know how it's worded currently, to just put a 10-point bump at the end of the year, which could solve both of these issues?
Yeah, 10 points awarded to the final grade.
For honors class, but then we need to take out the weighted GPA part.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mr. Wright, I see you're on the grading policy changes with me. Do you want to add that, or do you want me to add that?
Yeah, I was going to make a note of that if there was a consensus for when I write that in.
Okay.
If you want to do it on the form, that would be great. I'm taking notes.
Oh, okay.
That's cool.
So I let me just preface what I'm about to say with saying that I agree with everybody. The weighted GPA seems to be, have very little meaning when it comes to different areas of importance. So keeping the 10-point bump is probably best. I just want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. Could we potentially be making this decision just to benefit two students, the Val and Sal? Is there any other reason why it would be better to do GPA, keep the weighted GPA rather than the 10-point bump? So we're essentially deciding between the two because valedictorian and salutatorian are calculated based on the point.
There is a reason. So generally, scholarships and college admissions are based off of unweighted GPA as opposed to weighted GPA to try to eliminate variances.
I know Ms.
The
Bushley.
only reason, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're fine. I think I'm going to say probably the same thing. I think Ms. Bushley brought up last time, just like if a kid is regionally recognized or at an event with other schools, our GPA looks lower because it's not weighted, but that could be an easy fix. The great thing about having such a small school, if I know one of my softball players is going to be recognized, we have to make it known to the kids to come to either the counselor or to a teacher and find out what that weighted GPA would look like so that they can fill out their paperwork correctly and be recognized for the efforts that they are putting in.
And I have the same question though that I had the last 3 or 4 times we've discussed this, is I'm not sure, since we don't use it for anything and it's not used for scholarships, and the only reason that the site-based council originally added a weighting to honors courses was to serve that purpose, so that calculation would already be done and we wouldn't be sending kids to Jen Erdman or to the guidance counselor in WADS, when it comes awards time or banquet time, for kids to do that. Since it doesn't affect anything, we don't use it for anything at our school. I'm still, and I'm not trying to be difficult, I really just don't understand why it's a sticking point and seen as a double incentive when the colleges aren't using it for scholarships. We're not using it for Keys money. Literally the only reason we instituted it was so that it would already be calculated and ready to go for these kids that were going to, regional sports banquets essentially, so that they could look comparable to other districts who did do the weighting.
Well, I believe because it's twice, right? So like Mr. Bird said, if they have a C in the class and then they get bumped to a B, so now that would be like a 3.0, but now we're going to give them a 4.0. That it was just inaccurate.
And if that GPA was used for anything, I would understand that. But since nobody's using it, the colleges aren't using it, Keys isn't using it, we're not using it, I'm not sure what the harm is there.
Well, you have a child who gets a 70 and now all of a sudden they have a 90. I would think that'd be hard for parents and students to understand that you're comparable, your work is a 70, but because you get these 2 bumps, now you're at an A, that you were able to get an A in the class.
How are they getting a 90? The 10-point bump would bring them from a 70 to an 80. The weighting of the GPA doesn't affect their grade. It just affects the calculation of that cumulative GPA was my confusion.
Yeah.
What the 10-point bump is doing for every student that was going to get below an A in any honors course, it is inflating their true GPA when it comes in regards to their keys money. So they're all going to get more keys money. All the kids that got B's in honors classes are going to get more keys money now because we gave them 10 points, and keys doesn't see how we do our grade book. So keys folks assume everyone truly earned an A instead of earning a B. So that's what's happening. Every single student in an honors class is getting extra keys money, except for the ones that were already getting A's. They don't get anything extra because the 10 points doesn't help them.
So when we compare that though to surrounding schools who have the money to bring in teachers that are AP courses, they're getting that advantage anyway, and we don't get that advantage because we can't bring in the teachers or have the courses with our schedules to have AP classes.
The vast majority of schools have dumped AP and have gone to dual credit.
Right.
Because it's far easier for kids to actually get the credit. There are a handful in Northern Kentucky that still do it, but the vast majority do not offer AP any longer.
And committee members, did we see any other school that gave their kids a 10-point jump? I don't recall any other school giving a 10-point bump versus the weighted GPA. Didn't they all just do weighted?
Yeah, I don't recall any.
So if we're looking at anatomy across the board for other schools, we're already giving our kids, if we keep the 10-point bump, we're already inflating our kids' scores more so than any other school around us that we researched were.
How is it more than if we got rid of the GPA bump?
Yeah, I'm still confused.
Another number.
So what happens is,
by just the 10-point bump, sorry.
What the 10-point bump does is it inflates the unweighted GPA prior to I guess any examination from folk like scholarships or keys money. And so remember, these are just honors classes.
Keep in mind, that's what we want, right?
That's classes. What we want. They're not dual credit classes. These are just.
No, but we want our kids to not take. We want them to try to be better. That's the whole point. Is we're trying to incentivize them to take classes that are going to move faster and are going to be harder. And while I understand that, an 8th grade algebra 1, maybe not. It doesn't count for anything where my kids are at school because they want to take that because they have pride in it and want to do it. And whether it's going to matter or not, we're trying to push our kids to work towards those things and incentivize them for making that, like we talked about with the Val and Sal's, using the points. I want our Val to be somebody who was on an accelerated track, not to be somebody who just took whatever courses were easy for them so that they could maintain hundreds.
I think I understand what Mr. Bird is saying. So if a student gets a 90, they get a 10-point bump to 100, their GPA is a 4.0. A student gets an 80, they're bumped to a 90, their GPA is a 4.0. So you're penalizing students who would have gotten an A initially anyway.
No, they still get the 10-point bump, which helps increase their points toward valedictorian and salutatorian.
But it does not affect their unweighted GPA.
I'd have to check, but I'm pretty sure the way that Infinite Campus currently calculates is that within that 90 to 100, there are quality points that are awarded. I believe when I looked at it several months back, that the 4.0 is reserved for something above 90 and then up to 100. And then maybe I'm wrong, but when I looked at it, it looked like there was a delineation within the 90 to 100 range. But again,
so you're saying
if we're not using GPA, then I'm not sure.
You're saying we could potentially, or a student could potentially, if they got a 105, could get over a 4.0 on the unweighted GPA? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure about over 100. We'd have to look at Infinite Campus. But just me personally, I feel like doing what's best for students and to increase achievement, students are going to have an incentive to take those honors courses. And since GPA is not really used for anything by us or colleges or most scholarship purveyors, I feel like the 10-point bump is an accurate, incentive for kids to push themselves and take those higher course, which increases their achievement. And that's supposed to be our mission, is to increase student achievement as site-based.
This is unrelated, but if we confirm that there's some sort of a sliding scale, essentially pluses and minuses for classes, if there's quality points like that, if that's how IC is calculating that, we need to fix that, because that is not our policy. I mean, if at some point you want to adopt that's fine. But I just want to make sure that even if we're not using GPA for much, that we're following policy.
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Campbell, in that scenario that you said, even if it wasn't their actual unweighted GPA, when we talked about the Val-Sal, that point percentage does matter. So if it went over 100.
So I feel like what I'm hearing is that the points keep mattering. And if I had to vote right now, I would say I would approve 10-point bump on the final grade at the end of the year. And I know why we instituted the weighted GPA, but I think it's all silly, and I would be fine if it went away too.
I agree, Ms. Gutz.
I agree also.
So then that puts us at a majority of council saying keep the 10-point bump, eliminate weighted GPAs. Is that what you want for the first reading?
That would be fine. When kids go to get on stage, can they just be announced with an unweighted GPA of 4.0? And it mean as much?
I don't know. I don't know what sports banquets we're going to with all of these GPAs.
So this was external. It was an external thing. It honestly was one of our high performing students who was recognized externally and looked very bad compared to everybody they were on stage with because of the way that we did our GPA or reported our GPA. That was the only reason that this decision came about, was because we didn't know, and all of a sudden they're on the stage and they were a very, very high performing student and looked very poor in front of all the rest of the schools because theirs was reporting well under a 4 and everybody was at like a 4+5.
There's no awards programs, or you nominate a kid for an award and they have something in the paper or online or whatever that you're reading that they don't mention the student's GPA. And so that definitely does, present the student in a lesser light than potential peers.
We just put the word unweighted in front of it, though. I feel like
I don't think the average person, though, that really
understand
that, they just see what jumps out there, or they hear that. They hear 3.7, and it sounds a lot different than the weight, so or whatever it is, But I do think that definitely makes our student look like not as strong or what have you as others. That would it address the majority?
Would it address the majority of concerns if we just had the 10-point bump occur at the end of the year? Could we do away with all the rest of this conversation if we just had the 10-point bump occurring once at the end of the year and still keep the bump and the weighted GPA for external awards banquets and things like that, because I envision it being, at the end of the year when we have all these external regional awards banquets and things. It's a busy time of year anyway. We're going to be sending, multiple kids potentially to the guidance office to try to have them recalculate everything for 4 years worth of grades. I don't feel, I'm still not clear on how it's an additional bump if Keys isn't using it and we're not using it and scholarship committees aren't using it and colleges aren't using it. Literally the only purpose of it was for these external things. If the concern is primarily the potential for human error or extra work on the part of the teachers, can we address that by saying that the 10-point bump goes on once on the final grade at the end of the year? I'm just offering that up as a possible consideration.
I do think that would be best practice. It would streamline it and it would lead to less errors by doing it at the end of the year.
But again, if people are concerned about Keys money, the 10-point bump would affect Keys money more than the weighted GPA would. Because the 10-point bump is affecting your unweighted GPA. So a student who earns a B in the class is getting an unweighted 4.0 GPA.
Yeah.
But that's what the incentive is. The incentive is, hey, you're going to take this harder class. You're going to work at a faster pace. You're going to be expected to do more. And in return, you're going to end up with that 10-point bump, which is going to be more Keys money at the year. That was the whole purpose of the incentive.
I think some of this conversation stemmed from that with our current grading policy, our honors courses weren't more strenuous. They went at the same pace as other classes. So we were trying to figure out how to fix the pace of the course, make the kids work harder for that grade, and also make it the norm and not incentivize everything.
Right. And if that is the concern, I think that's something that needs to be addressed with the honors teachers that are teaching honors classes, and something that they could work on as a group with administration, as opposed to something that we have to change policy for.
It had more to do with deadlines and such, which is why you couldn't move quicker, because kids weren't turning things in to see where they were at.
And that's a behavior issue, and I feel like we can deal with that behaviorally, I hope.
So kids getting a 10-point bump? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Did dual credit kids get a 10-point bump?
No.
No? Okay.
I don't think so. Not to my knowledge.
Yes, they do.
They do? I thought we said they were not.
Now that will change that, because Keys does look at a dual credit point. So I would say we would need to take out the 10-point bump for dual credit classes, or because they're already getting that GPA bump from Keys at the end of the year. So they are double dipping, in fact.
I would recommend keeping the 10-point bump for all advanced classes or eliminating it for all, as opposed to having your honors here at Dayton have it and your dual credit not having it.
Yeah, because then you'll have more people doing honors here versus dual credit.
So originally what I kind of took as that consensus was that we wanted to keep the 10-point bump, eliminate the GPAs. It feels like there's been a swing in the conversation to where we want to keep both, and then just tweak the policy to where it explicitly states that the 10-point bump would be added at the end of the year. Someone please correct me if I'm mishearing the conversation. Otherwise, the 5 council members should make a decision, and we should move on from this point.
No, I feel like that we're leaning that way. Question though regarding the comment about the pace of a honors class moving forward. Is it are we not in a position where if we have students who have put themselves in an honors course, who is regularly not turning assignments in on time, that they be removed from the honors course and pushed down to a non-honors level course?
Yes, we can do that.
To treat that behavior so that we don't keep our teachers off of track?
That's certainly something that could be an option. And I think
Would
that
our schedule permit that though? Or would they be put on like an online? Like what would that look like? Because,
shouldn't be able to drop somebody down if that was the decision.
It may completely change the order of the courses that they take over the course of a day, but you should be able to do it without completely taking them out of courses. It might just be a different section of a particular course.
Okay. Would that help that side of the argument if we did something like that?
Yeah, that could definitely be something that we look at anytime that a kid is not being successful in honors and advanced courses, certainly. As far as correcting the behavior. Are there any objections to writing it to keep the 10-point bump, make it explicit that is added at the end of the year and not for quarter grades, and keep the weighted GPA?
I agree.
So my only objection is the fact that I don't believe the 10-point bump is fair to students who would have earned an A anyway. So that's my only objection.
Okay. And remember too that this still is not necessarily a final vote, and that we'll have to go through the reading process. So there's that. All right. So managing student work. The first point that we have is for late work. It says, for their own classrooms, teachers will develop their own policies and procedures regarding students submitting work late. These policies and procedures will include the point or percentage value of late work. Regardless of whether an assignment is late, teachers will review a student's work to provide feedback so that the student is well prepared for a summative assessment.
I think we spoke about this earlier. I know I would be in favor of having kind of a cap. I don't want teachers to be saying, after 5 days, it's a 0. I feel like there needs to be something included if we go with this that needs to say that the student can still pass, because otherwise, why am I ever going to redo it if I know I can't pass it or turn it in?
Or is it possible to grade the actual assignment when it comes in like normal, and then from there, those points get deducted? Because I know our last meeting you guys were talking about immediately just losing 10 points. But you guys also said you were going to then grade it before. You're already going to deduct points, but then you're going to grade it afterwards. Can't we just grade the assignment once it's turned in? If they get an 85, that's what they got. And then from there, the penalty will go into effect of you're 3 days late. So you're getting 5 points off, 10 points off, 15 points off, or whatever you all decide the point ratio needs to be.
Yes, that should be the approach that teachers still take if we go that route. And teachers should still be providing feedback just like any other assignment for that student. So that student should realize exactly why they scored the points that they scored, both from that academic standpoint and then from the late work standpoint of it as well. That should be very clear.
I think it'll all determine as well whether we use percentages or points. So you could say it's 10% off of the grade versus 5 points off of the grade. It just depends on what we decide to use.
Okay.
So I think what made me uncomfortable with it when we had the discussion last time was that it affected the different levels of students differently. And that is, I think, the piece that I need to get comfortable with is knowing that it's affecting a higher end student more than it's affecting a lower end student in the way that it was described before.
Can someone run me through that again? I don't remember that scenario. I'm blanking.
Well, it was basically that if we said that the minimum grade they could get was a 50%, and a student turns in work and gets 50% of the questions right and it's late, they still get the 50. But a student who turns in work and has 80% of the questions right, but it's late, they also get a 50.
So my recommendation for what you would need to look at would be that you could cap it at, this is the minimum that you have the opportunity to score. But like if say you take 20% off and a kid gets a kid gets the 80, then that grade overall would then turn into a 60. That kid would lose the 20%, as opposed to, I would not say that a kid can't earn lower than a certain, I wouldn't word it that way.
Well, you would want to flip it. You would want to say, instead of a minimum grade they can get, you would want to say to
a maximum,
a maximum number of points you can take.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I mean. So if I turn in a paper that is only 60% correct and I'm 2 days late, essentially it's a 40. Then it would maintain fairness to the kid, like to the high achieving kid.
If I were doing it, that's how I would approach it if I were you, but that's your decision to make.
Another thing is that the policy that's being proposed isn't this specific. It's just saying that teachers should basically have the autonomy to choose what grading policy they want to use. And we're trying to say within certain limits.
Because I'll be honest, as a former classroom teacher myself, that was a concern that I had, is I would not want to take 40% of a student's grade at any point. Like I said, the most I ever did was 15%. That was effective for me in my setting. So I would personally, autonomy has been the buzzword of this entire process. I'd feel really stifled by that.
Yeah, so I tried to take a step back from this and look at the big picture and just ask myself in the classroom, what if I had free reign to do whatever I wanted, what would I do? And I came up with a plan for myself. My concern is that under our current grading policy, I would not have been able to do that. Even though I think it's more than fair, and actually did not include any points being taken off from a student for their grade or being late. But still, even though there were no points being taken off under our current policy, I still wouldn't be able to do that.
Can you describe that scenario for us?
So what I thought I would do is I would have due dates, and the students would have to adhere to those. I would say at the beginning of the year, just a blanket policy that you have a 2-day grace period, no questions asked. After the 2 days, you may not turn the assignment in until you meet with me after school.
And I think that's fair. I like that approach better than automatic points being deducted for every day that it's late.
How is our current policy not allow you to do that?
Because the students have to be able to turn in the work. I have to take it.
But it doesn't our current policy let you do that contract, and you would be able to put that stipulation in your contract?
Yeah.
That is for summative assignments.
Okay.
So if we changed it to say that approach worked for formative also.
Well, the issue with that is the contract is somewhat designed to be cumbersome, to encourage students to perform well the first time, but also not have them pigeonholed into that specific grade. So doing it for every formative when we have 18 or so formatives every quarter, that could be cumbersome.
For the teacher or for the student?
Go ahead, Angela.
Oh.
Okay.
I would have a little bit concerned just because of the class size of the middle school, that every kid who wanted to turn something in late, if I needed to meet with them after school, there's not enough hours in the day to meet with them. So, but I know that that's your specific philosophy, like what you would want to do.
Right. So my point in all of this is that I don't feel comfortable saying to a teacher, you have to accept work at any point in time. I also don't feel comfortable saying to a teacher, you have to give these deadlines with these specific penalties. So I feel like what your policy says, where a teacher should have autonomy to come up with their grading policy within limits, I think that is a good way to go.
I agree.
That's the point I was trying to make.
That, isn't it? And maybe read it again, Mr. Wright, but I interpreted it that way, that it was pretty much up to teachers to decide how they wanted to handle late work. And then I would just propose that we add, and I like how we can change it to the maximum, to where after deductions, the maximum grade a student could get would be 60% or something like that.
That is how it's worded. It says that for classroom teachers, they will be able to develop their own policy and procedure regarding students submitting late work.
So how would we address then the teacher who says, I don't care, I'm not working with the student to make that up regardless, because I spent my time making this assignment, you didn't turn it in on time, and I'm just against it, I'm not letting them make it up?
Well, that's where our limitations would hopefully come into play there. Mr. Myers has been vocal in the past about, having minimum grades or maximum points off so that there still remains an incentive for students to turn in work and learn, more importantly, learn the material. So I think we could have a little bit of control over that preemptively.
And I would hope that that's the minority, and that would be an administration issue that they'd have to take care of.
I would very much want to know about that.
Yeah, that is a conversation administration would have to have with that individual when that comes to light. Now, sometimes keep in mind, you may not find out about things till later and what have you, but that definitely, that's more the administrative conversation with a particular person.
I know that I'm in the minority here, but if anybody wants my opinion, this is the part of the policy that I'm sure a lot of people probably don't want it, but this is the part of the policy that I have the biggest problem with, part of the proposal that I have the biggest problem with. I'm a firm believer that if we're doing what's best for students, that we're keeping mastery of academic material and grading of behavior completely separate. We had talked at one point about instituting like a 1, 2, 3, 4 system entered on the report cards having to do with these behavior related things like this, but I don't feel comfortable grading behavior. I feel like while this may make things easier for teachers in the short term, in the long term, I feel like this is going to be really difficult for students who are already on the borderline. I feel like we're going to have a higher failure rate, and I feel like ultimately that is going to affect accountability as a school as well. So not only do I personally feel like this is bad for kids, I feel like it's bad for our school as a whole as far as our accountability and freshman failure rate. And, you know, we currently have had the highest graduation rate and one of the lowest failure rates that we've had since like 2007. And we just spent many weeks last year revising the grading policy. And when I asked a couple of weeks ago how those changes had gone, the only feedback that I got was that it had been an improvement. And I know we're always looking to improve, but personally, I feel like we are in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. We don't know what instruction is going to look like next year. I know the board has a lot of weight on them right now trying to figure out how that's going to look. I know that site-based is probably going to come in according to KDE. Site-based is going to have a part to play in that as well. And I just feel like this is not really a time when we should be focusing on punitive. This is a time when we should be focusing on building support and growing and doing the best we can to try to increase student achievement and put our arms around them in a way that's positive. But that's just me.
Parents?
I agree with Ms. Bushley that, yeah, we don't know what the foreseen future is coming. However, this topic never goes away. I feel like we're always talking about it. I don't really have no one's really swayed me to either way on this one.
So do we want to bring this to a reading?
And we also, and I think we've brought this up where we can kind of adjust this too, or write it so that, maybe points aren't deducted in middle school, but then that starts in high school or something, like to prepare them because the whole reason it came up was kids weren't feeling prepared after they left, and basically teaching responsibility and getting things done on time and as a way to kind of motivate them to do that. I mean, we could adjust it so that maybe it's something that starts by high school.
If council wants, council can set different policy for 7 and 8 than 9 through 12.
And I think also we have instituted some pitfalls for kids who fall behind. Like we have incentive field trips, giving kids an entire day to work on work. The high school, they also, I know in years past, the kids struggling by December, pardon me, they're removed and put on online learning or ways to catch up on their GPA, their grades, their classes. So I think as long as we keep supporting them in those ways, teaching them some responsibility might help as well. But it also shows us what kids are really struggling with and not just being forgetful about, I feel, in the middle school.
So I've said before that I'm a fan of standards-based grading, full, true standards-based grading. This policy doesn't really apply to that, but what really swayed me to it is that, yes, our job as a council is to enhance student achievement. But I started reading some of the goals that were outlined under a couple of our statutes that were more specific as to defining student achievement. And some of those are including, sorry, I'm reading off my phone here. So core values and quality of good character to make moral and ethical decisions throughout his or her life. Sufficient preparation to choose and pursue life's work intelligently. There was one more that stuck out to me. Give me 1 second. Become self-sufficient individuals of good character, exhibiting the qualities of altruism, citizenship, courtesy, hard work, honesty, human worth, justice, knowledge, patriotism, respect, responsibility, and self-discipline. And those goals, as defined by our state, I think, having responsibility to turn something in a timely manner, I think those fall under those categories. So that's really what swayed me personally to go for this. I don't know if that helps anyone else, but it's my personal story.
I mean, I agree with it. Late work needs to be penalized. But I don't think I got the answer that I wanted. So that's kind of where I'm wishy-washy at, I guess.
What answer did you want?
I think, well, they're still debating if we're doing points versus percentage. I think there's too many other up in the airs for me to say. But I do agree that something has to be done. I have 2 of them that live here. Nothing really phases them. They think it's a joke. So I don't know.
Parent members, do we have feedback from other parents on this particular issue?
Yeah, I do, and it's kind of a mix. The ones that very much have their head in their child going to college doesn't like the retake policy. And those who have had kids on the struggling side who feel like their kids are learning more now because we've given them that opportunity very much appreciate it, which is why this is a harder decision for me because of the people that I've gotten feedback from. I've gotten a very mixed reaction. And who do you vote for, right? The higher end or the lower end achieving kid here, and that's why I struggle with it. Also, the fact that we made those adjustments with the contract and everybody, all of the teachers kind of said, yes, that made a difference. And we had less students taking or trying to retake because they had to go through more work. So I feel like that adjustment kind of helped in some way. I think it needs change. I think there needs to be some kind of deadline, and I don't know, something needs to be done. I just don't like it being just completely open to, you can do whatever you want, to that extreme where a teacher can say, I don't want to retake, or I'm always going to take this many points off, that kind of thing. I think that counteracts the progress that we've made over the years.
And it's not that I don't feel like the late work shouldn't be addressed. I just feel like it should be addressed because it's a behavior issue and not an academic issue. I feel like it should be addressed, but it should be addressed behaviorally. And I think that there are ways that we can incorporate things into the school day to hold students accountable for that. We had talked about at one point having, 1 day a week or 1 day a month or something where students can get additional assistance and kids are held accountable for turning anything in that's missing and things like that. I just feel like there are ways to address a behavioral issue behaviorally and it not negatively affect especially our struggling students academically. Because who in their life hasn't had an issue going on in their personal life that leads to them being late to a meeting or them turning in something late. If you showed up late to work as a teacher and immediately they docked 15% of your pay for that day because you were late, is that fair? Everybody has things going on. A large percentage of students in our district probably have a lot more going on than most people would think. We have a large percent of students who are dealing with trauma. And I just feel like we need to be cognizant of separating out behavior issues from academic issues, because those things need different remedies, in my opinion.
And I just wanted to speak on behalf of the contracts that were being used. And please jump in, other teachers, if you saw the same thing. My struggling kids are not the ones taking advantage of the contracts. Because it is an extra step, they actually are not doing them at all. They're not coming back to retake and retest. So it's usually my higher end kids that are looking for a better grade that are coming back to retake and retest with those contracts. At least that's what I saw in my personal classroom.
And Ms. Fields, I agree with you. Mine are just too lazy to even ask. And that's both of them. I'm not joking. Like, I can't tell you how many times, because I'm on Infinite Campus every single day. And as soon as I see a grade go in, and if it's lower than a C, my kids are text immediately, you need to get with this teacher about this assignment. And I always hear it, especially from Cooper. They won't let me redo it. They won't let. So I don't know what the kids know versus what we talk about in these meetings, but I know my kids don't typically retake anything or email the teachers if they're having a problem because they just feel like they can't. So,
Ms. Sparks, have you had a conversation with one of the teachers in a situation like that where they confirm that they wouldn't allow Cooper to retake something?
have I had the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
No, I have not, because I sit in these meetings and yes, that's what they're supposed to. So bleh, just wait till your kids are older.
No, that's precisely what I'm saying. Is if I had a 14-year-old boy, I'm trying to figure out, is the 14-year-old boy using the excuse that's going to keep him out of work, or do we actually have a teacher issue and we need to address it with that teacher? That's
I would say it's the 14-year-old boy problem because it's not one specific class. Because it could be math for one, and then all of a sudden he brings that up, and then all of a sudden we're back to social studies, and then we're back to science. Like, oh my goodness, can we just turn everything in on time? That's all I ask. So no, it's a kid situation. I have faith in the teachers. It's the kid thing, and I'm trying to not be that overbearing parent. And I'm trying to have my kids have that relationship with the teachers because I have faith in our teachers that they can talk to them and they'll work with them. And I need to know my place and not help them with their grades.
What about adding, I know Mr. Campbell had talked about like a grace period, because I really am kind of on both sides of the fence here. I think that responsibility and timeliness and things like that do need to be taught. And we don't have an extra bell in the day to take each kid and make sure that we're teaching those things and making sure work gets in on time. But it's a skill that we all need, and accountability. But I know I can think of like struggling students in my head that just don't learn that well in the typical environment, and they need that one-on-one time. And while personally I can think of them and know that I would need to work with them one-on-one and would not penalize them because it took 2 days before we could meet and get that assignment done. I don't know that everybody would do that. And I'm just trying to think of ways to kind of bring both ends together and what would be kind of a happy medium. And I don't know if maybe adding a grace period in there or something like that, is that taking away too much teacher autonomy? Is it making it more convoluted? Or does it just add a buffer for some of our kids who need it?
Well, I think what you would do in your class, Ms. Getz, may be different from what I do in my class, and Ms. Bushley may do in her class. The only thing the committee is asking for is for the ability for the teacher to decide on their own. And I would like that personally. And, you know, I've talked to several other teachers who have mentioned that they would also like that ability to decide how they handle it in their own class.
Parents who have also said that there were teachers who were not, this is over the years, because this policy has been in place for years, where we get teachers who say, I don't really care if it's policy or not, you're not going to retake this test. And I know like that becomes an administration issue and it's not all the time, but I feel like it's a conversation that I do hear from parents every single year.
You know, one really easy tweak that we could do to what has been proposed is to say that every teacher's individual policy would require administrative approval. I don't know why I stuttered so bad there, but to where either Mr. Myers or myself would have the opportunity to intervene if there was something that was really not going to be a policy that was conducive to success.
I really like that, Mr. Wright, especially like giving out syllabuses at the beginning of the year, having them approved beforehand and the parents know they're approved. That would be really nice. And I think for the middle school, we would probably all get on the same page anyway, just because the kids are so much younger, to come up with a late policy or come up with a grace period. So there's still that autonomy to do that. We would just all put our heads together to make it happen for the younger kids.
And I would like the consistency in middle school because God knows they struggle with enough.
And I would say that the high school teachers could also have a forum where they discuss their policy so that first year teachers can hear other people's policies and figure out what that looks like for them. But I like the approval of the administration because you then know exactly what each teacher's will look like. And if a parent has an issue or a discussion, you have a copy of it, we have a copy of it, we're all on the same page.
So I agree with that. But from a parent's side who has multiple children, all the teachers having a different way, that's kind of a nightmare to figure out. Who do I go to? Am I always going to Scott and Chris every time something's not right? How do I decipher, like?
Well, so I think the time to go to Scott or myself would be if the teachers put out that syllabus and they're clearly violating whatever agreement that they've set up with the teacher or with the student and the parent at the beginning of the year.
Okay, but if I have 3 kids and they all have 6 different classes, 6 different teachers, that's how many different syllabuses that I have to stay on top of to understand what's the rule in this class because this is different. You know what I mean? To address.
Essentially, they should always be getting the opportunity to make up work. That should never go away. The only real point of contention that was brought up by this conversation is how much of a percentage it would be taken off, and potentially, like in the scenario that Mr. Campbell threw out, would there be a grace period, or would it be a hard deadline? So there would be a large variance of policies. I definitely sympathize with that, and I'm not trying to minimize that by any means. But it should be, they should be straightforward as well. So that's a little bit of me talking out both sides of my mouth and saying I understand both sides on that one. So
don't we all have our own teacher sites too, where that could be posted? Like, I mean, I know it's still right. That would be a lot to keep up with, but if at least you knew where to find it and we could get out teacher websites, that would be helpful.
So would there be, Ms. Gonzalez, would there be more of an appetite to potentially allow for points or percentages to be taken off for late work as long as there was more uniformity to it?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not against having points taken off or
I think I misunderstood
completely.
the original point and then
Yeah.
put it together after I sat there for a
Yeah,
second.
to me, it's more of how to address the overall issue, because I have been one of those people who over the years have had multiple encounters with teachers who have said that you absolutely cannot make this up. And my biggest concern with that is I'm on site-based, so I know the rules, right? So I push my kids to go back and say, so go ask the teacher again politely before I have to take it to the principal. That then it puts me in a position where it's a teacher against me or my students challenging the teacher, and it's just a really awkward position to be in. But what about those students who don't have a parent advocate for them who can say, go question that, go challenge that behavior or whatever? So now this is a very clear policy that we have. We open it up. Now every teacher can make their own. Now it's not so clear. Now you're spending a whole lot of time trying to, one, figure out what is the policy, then two, going through and figuring out how do I address it, between not stepping on a teacher, like by going over their head, by not putting my child in a power where they're challenging the teacher. That whole thing has just kind of been rough over the years.
And one thing that I'm hearing is that Scott and I need to do a better job of expressing to our staff that there's never going to be a time where a student just flat out does not have an opportunity to make up an assignment. And that's something that we are going to have to address when we come back from summer break, because whether we make changes here or not, in either scenario, there should never, ever be a point where that is the case. And if some of that is slipping through the cracks, obviously we need to address it. Where does the rest of council stand as far as perhaps something more uniform, looking at something more uniform as opposed to this where every teacher is making their own policy?
I understand where Angela is coming from, but I think that the committee's original point was to kind of have that autonomy. And I feel like if we did make it we're taking away from one to appease the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How does the committee feel about that? Am I wrong in saying that was kind of your initial objective?
For me personally, autonomy was the key aspect for me.
Do you have any information regarding how many teachers were in favor of autonomy?
I'd have to look for a second. I don't have anything readily available at this moment.
And I would say for me, it was autonomy a little bit, but more so in the middle school, it was trying to keep kids on track or close to being on track so that their summative assessment truly showed what they know. Because some of them are taking summative assessments, but they're 3 weeks behind on material because they're not turning it in. So then they're playing backwards. They're failing the summative, trying to go backwards in work. And it became a disaster for both the teacher and the student. So trying to implement more days of review, like we talked about with midterms, more days of incentive field trip time where they can redo assignments, that kind of thing. It was a little bit of everything, but I think the responsibility factor, if you ask some of the kids, some of them actually want deadlines because they'll ask, when is it due? When do I have to turn it in? And I think those kids we were neglecting a little bit just by not having set deadlines. And some kids are like, well, I didn't feel like doing it last night because there wasn't a deadline. Or So I think just trying to push kids to just raise the bar for them, and then catch the ones that are struggling. It'll be a lot easier, I think, to catch the strugglers if we're pushing the higher end ones to excel more.
Yeah, see, I'm not opposed to a deadline. My opposition is more related to a streamline and not being able to eventually learn the material by being able to retake to catch up. I agree that I think they should have to turn it in. They should have a deadline. They should have to have a starting point.
And I think
Could
the
we
key,
com-
is what Mr. Wright said, is that we should always allow kids to have a chance to make up work, regardless of what percentage point is taken off, not taken off. They should always have a chance to prove what they know or what they've learned, or have one-on-one with teachers after school. I'm not like arguing that at all. I agree with that.
And this kind of does this because the contract, they really only had a week. That kind of pushed them forward. Whereas if we are not following that now and go to this, then are we saying that technically they could make up a week one summative the last week of the quarter, but just with less points? Because then that's kind of what, there was an issue before.
If I understood the committee correctly, I think they were not intending for us to change the summative policy. Is that right?
You're
Just
correct.
formative.
Yeah, this was just for formatives.
Okay. So, okay.
I think the contract was helping. I still have my concerns about it, just because it is another loop. Some of the kids who are struggling don't reach out. But I think it was helping. It was helping kids to be more responsible for their summative. But then they weren't completing the formatives that led up to the summative, and they were wondering why they kept missing points on their test, because they didn't do the preloaded work to get those questions correct. So if we force them, or not force them, help them to make up some of that late work by instituting more, I don't know, once a quarter like we do in the middle school, once a quarter incentive field trips to give them time to work on that missing work, it would help. It'd bring them forward a little bit quicker, and then those midterms would be a reteach opportunity as well.
Okay. So I'll be honest in saying that I thought we were talking across the board. And it does make a difference to me that it's just the formative.
We could also have some sort of compromise as well, as so that teachers would have autonomy to come up with their grading policy within certain limits. So even if you couldn't keep up with every teacher's policy, you would know what the max limit was for whatever a teacher decided to do.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, the way it's currently worded in our notes is, it says each teacher can develop their own policy and procedure regarding students submitting late work. These procedures and policies will include the point or percentage value of late work. Regardless of whether an assignment is late, teachers will still review the student's work and provide feedback so the student can be well prepared for the summative assessment. So it had nothing to do with summative originally. It's just we were talking about formatives. How do we get kids caught up on formatives and stay accountable on those formatives in order not to play reverse test taking? Like, I'm going to take the test, I'm going to fail it just because I know I can retake it, putting that more weight on the formatives.
So I could definitely write it in a way that it was clear that it was just formatives. So we're saying that we would be okay with not taking points off of a summative speech that was not ready to be delivered on time, or a summative project that was not submitted on time, because there are instances where there will be homework that is summative. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm clear for when I attempt to go to potentially word this.
I think for the summative, what Mr. Campbell sort of mentioned, and this is the teacher autonomy, he would have a conference with that kid who's turning in a late speech. And you know what I mean? There would be other steps. Hopefully that's the minority of students who would turn it in that late, being that it's a summative. But we were really just trying to attack the formative right now. Yeah.
So essentially it would just kick into the contract, and then whatever you develop with the contract with the kids in those circumstances is what you would do.
That's how I took it, because
Okay.
the contract did show that there was some improvement. So you would just add it to your contract, the wording for late summatives, how that would be handled.
Okay. Where there's already some autonomy and some variance as far as how you do your contracts. It's a standard form, but as far as what you use.
The steps to relearning.
Right.
Or learning for the first time.
So I can do this a couple of different ways. I can essentially go back and revise the policy as the committee proposed it with formatives and more teacher autonomy. I could also take an example standard across the board policy. Full disclosure, I would probably take what the middle school, pretty much what the middle school has submitted at this point. I could write that in the language as well, and then we could bring it back and we could actually get to a vote if there's a desire to do it that way.
Say again what you said you were going to pull from the middle school.
So I could essentially take the middle school's policy and I could put that into the language that would meet the current policies, that would adapt the current policies that we have in place, to where you could bring before council both a potential policy that would give teachers the autonomy that was presented here by committee. You could also do more of what Ms. Gonzalez is discussing and having a more streamlined across the board late work policy. I could bring both of them forward and then you all can make a decision off of that.
Are we still talking about this affecting only formative, or are we talking about it affecting everything at this point?
Only formative.
Only formative. Yeah, I like the suggestion that I think it was Mr. Campbell that brought up that there was like a max kind of streamline, and up to that there's teacher autonomy. Like, we know that at the very least here is what you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there has to be a limit.
I agree with that. And I think the limit has to be some form of passing grade.
So you're just saying you could write it one way that's pretty much streamlined throughout the school, and one way that's like this where it just talks about formative and adds a limit. And then we can look at both at the next meeting and then rediscuss.
If you would like me to do it that way, yes.
Fabulous. And then we could move on.
All right.
That's
part of what I'm attempting to get to right now.
Thank you for that.
I like the combination of the 60-40 for the formative, so we're giving it more weight for the kids. I like the fact that trying to streamline the formative assessments for kids where we're it does, by doing the work, does prepare them better. So when they sit down, they take that test, they're better prepared. It's more indicative of what they have learned. So getting a truer indication. I think that I do like very much an agreement on having some type of a cap, in terms of here's what it is, whether it's 20% off. I'm just throwing out a number. If it's 20% off that you can get, but you can earn the rest of the points. We're continually to promote student learning. And I do think that heard a lot of good feedback. I know it wasn't perfect, but a lot of good feedback on the retake policy for our summative. So hopefully that kind of gets our students headed in the right direction in terms of preparation and continuous learning.
if you all give me until the end of next week, I will go ahead and send out what both of those scenarios could look like for potential late work policies for you to review, so that we wouldn't go into the next meeting cold, having not seen it.
Thank you. I would appreciate that.
You're welcome. Okay, so we'll do that. Let's. I said I didn't want to be here at 6:30. It's 6:25. Let's go and do the next point was suspensions. When a student is suspended, all missed assignments will be awarded 0 points. However, the student may make up all summative assessments missed during suspension when arrangements are made with the teacher. And then the note on that is that students can learn the formative information, complete formative assessments, and receive teacher feedback for completing missed formative assessments. However, these formative assessments will not receive credit in the gradebook.
So the only issue I have with that is how quickly we suspend a student who is involved in a fight who didn't start the fight. I have a hard time with that. The manner in which we're suspending students for some smaller things like that, and those students are getting zeros because we're following through with we're giving the same punishment to everyone kind of policies.
I've only seen one instance where a kid was just sucker punched and that kid did swing back. I don't know. I don't know.
I just again feel like we're grading behavior, which concerns me.
So, Ms. Bushley, what would be your suggestion for kids who are suspended the time that they're out? What do you do in the grade book for them?
Well, what we currently do is put missing, which calculates as a 0 for EOP and things like that until they make that assignment up. So yeah. It's not right. It's not like we're giving them credit for something they haven't done. But I feel like if a student is having a behavior problem that leads to a suspension, they're receiving a consequence for that behavior through the suspension. I feel like it's a double whammy to also potentially have, be failing assignment. Have 0. It's very difficult to recover from a 0 in the grade book. Very difficult to recover from that. It makes me uncomfortable that we're assessing an academic grade based on a student's behavior, which has nothing to do with their mastery of the content. It just makes me uncomfortable.
So you would still be fine with us putting in missings for those kids, which is equivalent to a 0, until the student makes the attempt to make them up.
That should be what we're doing now.
Well, I know some kids last year were suspended and they were requesting work to be sent home during their suspension, which therefore doesn't become a what's the word I'm looking for? A punishment for them at all. Because by the time they got back, they were still eligible to play football, basketball, whatever it was.
I'm uncomfortable with the 0s because, again, I don't think many of our kids are going to do it just so that they perform well on a summative. I would be more in favor of using the late work policy. If you're suspended for 2 days, then that's kind of like your 2 days. Whatever that end up being, I would feel a little bit more comfortable if there was some type of where those kind of intervened instead of just going straight 0.
Basically, you're saying they don't get those days back like they would if it was an excused absence.
Correct.
Right.
I like that suggestion, Erin. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Use it
I
as
like
a
that
work policy.
And we're talking strictly formatives. I mean, the policy says students would be able to make up summatives. We're talking strictly formatives. Points off on a formative aren't going to kill the student's grade.
I agree with that, but I was just thinking 0s can kill a student's grade.
Yeah.
So
I
would
do
there,
like that suggestion.
So could we write it where it was formative assignments missed during a suspension would adhere to the late policy?
yeah.
All right.
Is
Yeah,
there a
I'm
consensus to do
into
so?
the notes there.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, so I was just saying, as you guys were talking, I was putting it into the notes, the Google Doc that I sent out to everybody.
Okay. I like that better just because when you give it, like Ms. Bushley said, it's hard to recover from that. My question would have been, how do you get that student back, right? Once you've suspended them and now they're a 0 and now it's kind of really hard to get them back on track because we've not given them any way to really find themselves out.
Okay, so I will write that in a way that suspensions would fall under our formative late work policy. And then our very last point, we're under the gun here. Mr. Myers has to go. He had a joking aside, he had a firm 6:30. He had to be out. ISD, work assigned in ISD must be completed in order for a student to make up work missed in class. ISD work must not be what is completed in class that day. The student is assigned ISD. Each teacher must provide a folder of work to be completed in ISD, and the student must complete that assigned work for the classes he or she misses while in ISD.
So this goes back to our policy we had a couple years ago where at the beginning of the year we gave the ISD teacher information or work that deals with our class. And as students were sent there throughout the day, they worked on something that was already pre-prepared. I know it's become sort of a rotating circle in and out of ISD for some kids. And the work that's being completed is not authentic to what they know. And it's very hard to know if they understand it when you're not there helping them. So we were talking about going back to providing work ahead of time. A student finishes, like say mine's a nonfiction article about something in history. They read it, they analyze it, they answer the worksheet for me. Then they are able to make up the assignment for me in class.
I like that.
A lot of times they're getting sent to ISD to do work that they've not even learned in my class yet.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think it might try to stop some of that circulation going in and out of the ISD room too.
Yeah, because they really don't want to read one of my nonfiction articles. So if they do that, though, if they read that article, then they can make up the work that they missed that day in my class. And I'd be more than happy to stay after school and help them with that. Hopefully to deter kids from wanting to go to the ISD room.
Just to do their work. Yeah.
Just to do the work. Mm-hmm.
And it did say that they could do missing work, right?
Yeah, so if they're behind, if they're already behind in something that you've already taught and retaught them over and over, then they can make that up. But if it's that current day's assignment, how do you know they understand it? And what was happening is kids were getting on their computers and cheating on the answers, and then it showed on the summative, and you know what I mean? So it was a catch-22 for all parties.
What happens if a kid goes into ISD and refuses to do the additional assignment?
In the middle school, we have the incentive field trip. So eventually they're going to have to do the assignment, or there will be a penalty for it. They can't do the field trip, or, you know what I'm saying? If they let it stockpile, unfortunately, there's going to be those kids that do that. There's that day where it's like five kids to one teacher. You have that opportunity to help them out. But there's always going to be those couple kids that aren't going to abide by anything we put in place. But I think it'll keep some of our fence sitters from wanting to go into ISD.
Well, I'm just trying to understand what the potential consequence is if a kid refuses to do the work, because if a kid is getting put in ISD, they're the kids that are more likely to say, screw that, I'm not doing it.
So then they can't make up their other work.
Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, they won't be able to make up their formative assignment until they get that work done.
That's the very first point. So
yeah, and then also I know.
But then do you have kids?
Go ahead.
No, I just had a question. So do you then have kids potentially getting further behind though?
Well, how would they be able to do the work from that day if they haven't heard the information in my class, if they're out of my class? So they're going to get behind. But at least they're doing something that is academically based and not just sitting in ISD waiting.
I guess my question is, Beth, so that if they don't do the work, if they choose not to do the work in ISD, does that mean they can never make up that assignment from that day they missed? Because
No,
if they can't, then I worry that it's going to compound.
They can if they want to do that work eventually.
Yeah, and I think that's where the middle school is a different beast, because we do have those days set aside for kids to make up work. And I know also, without him being on here, Mr. Herbst, he intervenes when kids refuse to do work, and he usually pulls them aside one-on-one, sits them in his office where it's nice and quiet, calms them down, whatever needs to happen behaviorally for them to at least complete the assignment for that hour.
Hey guys, not to just completely rush us, but Mr. Myers has to go in the next minute, and he is our council chair. So we're going to either need to decide that we want this put up for a first reading or table it, or we got to make a decision here. Because he's going to have to go and the meeting's going to end at that point.
Didn't we vote Ms. Bushley a vice chair that she could pick it up?
I was under the impression that we voted her a vice chair for next year.
Oh.
Which starts July 1.
Yeah.
Unless I misunderstood that.
Okay, I would say let's take, this is the last bullet point, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll table the ISD part because I'll be honest, I feel like I need to be reading it at the same time. I'm a little foggy on it. And then look at the draft of the writing in a few weeks at our next meeting.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, then is there a motion to dismiss the meeting?
I will make a motion to dismiss.
And I will second it.
Second.
All right, thank you all for your work tonight. It was thoughtful discussion and good discussion across the board. So thank you all.
I want to thank everybody for their time and effort, and been great discussion, and I think we're making a lot of headway, and I think it's gonna be good for our school when the finished project comes out. So appreciate everybody. Sorry to rush. Have a commitment here at 7, and I'm getting some blowback here in the house. I've got to get going here. So thank you guys. All right.
All right.
Great night.